Hello everybody, this is Gregory with How I Lost Over 100 Pounds and Have Kept It Off for 30 plus years, where there should be no hesitance in your weight loss and maintenance. Today we're going to talk about how not to give your disordered eating from your past to your children. Now before we begin, if you need help with weight loss, especially from the psychological point of view, contact me through the Clarity FM link found here in the episode notes. Also check out my website, Naturopathic Earth, which has 600 articles and recipes that might be useful to you. My podcast, The Awakened Man, which has been around since 2017. And lastly, if you appreciate my content, there is a link for PayPal. All right, so we've talked about kind of like the analogy of ordered eating versus disordered eating, and how many people who are overweight or were overweight have disordered eating or disordered relationship with food. And I think the best way to juxtapose it is the way I've juxtaposed it in the past, where if you put food in front of a child, you could put a cheeseburger, something very tasty, ice cream, whatever it is, and they'll leave it there until they're hungry, and then, or they'll tell you, I'm hungry. And then you put food there, and it's interesting to watch children eat because they'll just eat and they'll play with the food, but they'll eat and then they'll just run off and go play. And there's no idea of, I need to eat until this is completely gone. They just eat till they're no longer hungry, and then they go. Whereas if you have a disordered relationship with food, you feel like you got to eat it all and you got to eat more and more and more and more. And why is that? Because you're trying to numb the pain. And why do people have disordered relationships with food? Is because something traumatic happened to them in their childhood. And I would say that's probably the central thesis of this channel is stating that most obese people, or even addicts of any sort, had something that threw off their psychosexual development as a child. And that's what made them turn to fill in the blank. And it's not always food. It can be something else, gambling, porn, whatever it is, hair pulling, nail biting, whatever it is. But something threw it off, whether it be neglect, abuse, seeing something really bad happen and you have PTSD, whatever it is, it threw off your relationship with food. So I've talked about in the Confessions of an Obese Child playlist here about my childhood when I was fat, is I had a kind of a mercurial father who was an alcoholic, so he ran hot and cold like a lot of alcoholics. And then I had a mother who was checked out, depressed all the time, maybe because she was dealing with the mercurial Jekyll and Hyde, but she was checked out and she never gave me nurturance. And so as a young child, for whatever reason, I don't have any recollection of this when I was 4 or 5. I just remember being older and already having this disordered relationship with food. But I turned to food because food was easily accessible, was available, right? It wasn't like I could get to the liquor cabinet or even knew what liquor was or something else. So it was food. And so I just ate to feed me, to nurture me, because I wasn't getting nurturance from my parents. And I've talked about in that series and on the Reflections of a Weight Loss Warrior series, how I eventually came to terms with them, came to terms with my parents. And I don't blame them. I think that's a victim mentality that we shouldn't have. Blaming parents, blaming others for the way we are. We have to be accountable for what we put in our mouth. So how do you not give that to your children? Well, there's a couple of options. One is don't even let them know that you were overweight. Don't even let them know. Now, I talked about it in the episode I did about my son who's kind of stocky. He knows about my past. Now, do I regret telling him? I don't know, because I've told him it's like, I grew up overweight. It was really tough on me. And then I lost the weight. Most people don't lose the weight. You don't want to do that. And to the most I've ever said to him is like, make sure that you eat when you're hungry and not because you're bored or other things like that. So I'm not trying to pass on my eating issues or that I used to have on him. But I also noticed that, well, why is he stocky? Because he's somehow numbing the pain. Look, it's intergenerational trauma. He's a kid from a divorced couple. So is it really surprising that he's doing that, even though my other kids don't do that? But maybe my other kids will manifest a dysfunction a different way. I don't know. They're all pretty young. He's 11. I think one of the other things is don't tell them. The other one would be don't ever tell your kids to finish the plate. I don't know where this idea comes from. I think it's maybe because in the 70s there were starving Chinese and starving Ethiopians or whatever, and we're like, all those kids are starving, you need to finish your plate, or it's an insult to your mom if you don't finish the plate. But we're teaching kids right there to have a disordered relationship with food, and that we're teaching kids to be gluttonous. And even if you're not hungry, keep feeding, keep eating. And so they'll have that wired into them at a young age. Well, I guess I got to finish every plate. And so people, and I know people who've posted comments on that too as well. It's like, well, I was taught this. And so when I got older, I just finished the plate, plus I'm numbing some other pain. So I think it's a very fine line. If you're overweight and you have a child, and we talked about in the episode in the intergenerational trauma how a lot of overweight parents have overweight kids, and I talked about my hatred about Golden Corral and seeing fat parents take their kids to Golden Corral and they're just shoveling food and the kids don't know any better, kind of like when I was a kid, and now they're going to be overweight and all the problems that come with that. And so I think if you're overweight and your child is young, maybe a toddler still, you need to be keenly aware of how you're eating, because kids will pick that up. So if you are a glutton and you're just woofing everything down or eating really fast and eating their food like my father used to do, I think they're more likely to kind of have that disordered relationship with food because they see that you're doing it. I think also if you tell them to clean the plate, I think that's another thing. So I think you need to watch your kids. I think most kids are tabula rasa, as Plato said, an empty slate. And so if you look at your kid as an infant or a toddler, they're just going to eat and then walk away. But you need to kind of be vigilant and watch them and check their behavior. But if you ever see them developing that, I would probably have a conversation with them that's age appropriate. But I would also look in the mirror and see, what am I doing? What behavior am I modeling and mirroring to them that would make them also do their behavior? Because again, we are the most influential people in their life, at least when they're very young. Later on, it's Hollywood and social media, let's be honest. So I think these are some tips that you need to do so you don't pass them on. And one of the biggest things, of course, is do the deep work, because a lot of overweight people can't even accept the premise that I've already given about that they're overweight and they're using food to numb the pain because of childhood trauma. So if you deny that, or you're so steeped in cognitive dissonance about that, you're going to keep having bad relationships with food and alcohol, and you won't even know. You're like, oh, no, and then, no, my kid's not fat and your kid's fat, or your kid has the same problem. Oh, no, it's not. You're in massive denial. So the first step, of course, is to acknowledge why you're fat. And it's not a glandular issue most often than not. It's because you're numbing some sort of pain with food or alcohol, and you got to admit yourself to that. You have to admit that, and that's the first step. If not, you're going to train wreck your kids' lives, and we don't want that. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.